I'm Gordon Davis, a solicitor who's assisting Dr. Clare Craig in her attempts to compel the Information Commissioner's Office to force release information and data held by the UK Health Security Agency in connection with the pandemic and a Covid vaccination programme and possible harms and injuries and benefits that might be a result of the policy at the time. By now you'll have already seen the introduction that Dr. Craig gave as to why she's launching this legal action, and this session has the purpose of delving into greater detail with questions and answers as to the background of the information she is looking for, what she intends to do with it, and how the scientific community can act in an unfettered way to get to the truth about public policy. So, good afternoon, Dr. Clare.
Good afternoon, Gordon.
Tell us a bit of a potted history as to how we've reached this point that you feel the only course of action now is to take legal action against the ICO office.
Okay, so I think we start with the Office of National Statistics, who had been publishing data on deaths by vaccination status. And they were quite transparent. It wasn't a perfect data set, but it was a helpful one. And they repeatedly published it. But as time went on, they were sharing fewer and fewer of the total number of deaths. It was, they were sort of hiding something there. And we had really struggled with ONS, Freedom of Information requests. But with the UKHSA, which was Public Health England, had actually been quite helpful over the previous years. So we thought, well, let's approach them because they also have this data because they have a vaccination database and they have to remove people when they die. So we approached them and we were denied the request. This was back in February 23. We were denied the request on the basis of privacy issues. And so I replied and said, well, we can anonymise the death dates, which is all we were asking for, was death dates and vaccine dates. That anonymise the death dates by adding or subtracting 1 or 2 days randomly, and then you can't tell who's who. And they said that would be the creation of new data. That was the excuse they gave. So I approached the Information Commissioner's Office, who helped with these issues, and got somebody really helpful who said, yes, absolutely, that's not the creation of new data. I can give you case law. Let's just, get this data out for you. And we went back to the UKHSA with a new request. He wanted to start from scratch. So we started from scratch in August 2023. And again, we were denied on the same excuses about privacy around death dates, which is really ironic given that the ONS was publishing COVID deaths by week and local authority and age down to individuals. And it was just a number in a spreadsheet. It wasn't a name. But they wouldn't give us that. They wouldn't give us a number in our spreadsheet because apparently that was going to be a problem. And so again, I went back to the Information Commissioner's Office expecting them to be as helpful as they had been earlier. And they seemed to have some kind of character transformation. So the second time they came up with this very lengthy, long legalese document, which said that they couldn't possibly support release of this data because on the one hand, it might cause mental health, it would be a danger to the mental and physical health of bereaved people if we had some numbers in a spreadsheet. And on the other hand, they were saying that the data could be used for misinformation. That was their claim. And so on the basis of those two things, we were being denied the data. But the UKHSA did give us some data. So we were given data by month of death and by week of vaccination, which is not as granular as we had requested. And in the meantime, the Czech Republic have released this data in a far more granular way, with details about what vaccines were given, with actual dates of death. And so, the idea that the position they're taking is that the Czech Republic has done something harmful. And I don't think that's the case at all here. I think they're just trying to hide data, which they shouldn't be allowed to do.
So why do you think they're taking the opinion in the ICO's mind them not being scientists like yourself, why would they have an opinion as to what could possibly cause harm to an individual? Where would they get that expertise or entitlement to making such an opinion from, do you think?
I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, that is a very odd thing for them to be saying, isn't it? Especially when the reason we have an ICO is that they're meant to be there to help the public get access to information that the public is requesting. And the spirit of that legislation is around the public knowing what's in the public interest. And so the ICO is meant to be on our side, and they're not.
So if they're not medical experts, and people like you are, surely as a matter of public policy, they'd want you to actually have a look at the data, not withhold it. That seems slightly odd to me.
It is odd. And the thing is, it really undermines trust. We used to have a real kind of culture of data transparency in the UK, which was envied around the world. And we've actually relatively had good transparency since 2020 as well. But it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse as time has gone on. And data transparency is how you breed trust. And trust seems to have just not been a priority, and it has been destroyed. And if you're going to try and repair the damage that's been caused, that has to come through openness.
So the information that you've received so far, what's inadequate about it?
So it doesn't have the same granularity as we were requesting, and it gives an impression. It gives a feel of where the sort of boundaries might lie, but we want to have data where we can actually look at the details. And I don't see that the data we've requested is really very much different to what they've given us. Having that extra granularity is not going to cause harm. It's crazy for them to make that excuse.
Why would anyone consider truthful knowledge to have the propensity to cause harm? From an outsider like myself, I would imagine when you hear about people bringing closure to a matter, that actually helps. It's a cathartic process. It helps people. Is there any logic to saying that knowing the truth can be harmful? It seems a little bit odd, that to me.
Yeah, so I think they have the idea that, that people are too stupid to get to the right answers, and only experts in their ivory towers are capable of getting to the right answers, and they can only understand the complexity. It's terribly complicated, you see. I mean, that feels like that's the attitude that that people who are not in certain positions are not able to do reasonable analysis, as if we've got a vested interest. Like, we really don't have a vested interest in this at all. We are just trying to be on the side of the public to have openness and transparency. Now, of course, they do have a vested interest in keeping this hidden. And by hiding it, they're making it look like they're hiding something that the public would not want to see, and suggesting it will create misinformation. Likewise, that sort of whole misinformation feeding vaccine hesitancy line implies that there's something there that we ought to be able to see that we can't see. And it might not even be there. They're really potentially creating this image of hiding an inconvenient truth that isn't even there. So they're shooting themselves in the foot doing that. I really think so. They're damaging trust even more.
But with expert guidance from people like yourself, don't you think the UK population has a level of discernibility where it can discriminate between bad information and good information? And it seems to me, from what you're saying, that there's an argument, well, we can't allow any information to be released if it doesn't match public policy. But that's a direct contradiction of what the Freedom of Information Act was supposed to be all about.
That's right. So the Freedom of Information Act is meant to be about the public being the best judges of what's in the public interest. And I think that's right. I think that sentiment is the right one to have. These people are collecting this data, spending taxpayers' money doing it. And so taxpayers should have the right to access it. Right.
So you feel like you've gone as far forward as you can with reasoned debate, and that's now come to an impasse, and you're forced to go down a route of applying to the lower tribunal to get the ICO to recognise it is actually in the public interest, and they should have a confidence in a professional such as yourself to analyse data and report on it impartially. It doesn't seem to me that that is a particularly high hurdle we have to argue, but with the challenges that you face so far, it doesn't seem to me that we're being told everything that's going on in the background there, because it's such a logical thing to do to release this kind of information. I'm not saying that there's at all any conspiracy behind this, but let's hope that the ICO does place its faith in you and the public to get to the point where we can make a decision as the public is entitled to about what is the best policy to manage this kind of information release going forward. And I think it would set a really good precedent that if they release the information, it's peer reviewed by people like yourself, it gains confidence that they really don't have anything to hide going forwards, because this is not just something maybe to reflect on as has happened to date, but surely this kind of challenge will be necessary going forward for any kind of public policy. Is that? I
completely agree. And I think this is much, much bigger than the COVID vaccine story. This is about nipping in the bud a change of approach by which, data can be hidden from the public. It's much, much bigger. It's about freedom of information in general and saying, look, if you've got a request, it's a reasonable request. You have to release the data. You can't make up silly excuses that are clearly not true in order to not release the data. That's the real argument that we need to make.
Very good, very good. So the crowdfunder that you're launching, the initial target is to raise something like £8,000 to get through this process. Hopefully we'll hit that target. We may even breach it. Any excess funds, what would you like to see done with those if you're in that fortunate position to get to that point?
So the plan is to use any excess funds for similar cases, so cases around freedom of information requests where there's been a denial of data release, and it could be on any topic, but just I think that's what we're going to focus on using that money for.
Very good. Are there any precautions that you would adopt in analysing the data before you presented it?
Absolutely. So the vaccinated and the unvaccinated are different types of people. They're from different socioeconomic groups, different demographics, and people who were dying, there was a disproportionate number who refused the vaccine at all. So there's a very high mortality rate in the unvaccinated at the point at which people are getting vaccinated. So all those factors have to be taken into account. But the thing with this kind of data is being able to look at what happens over time. And if you've got the same population who are dying at different rates over time, you can start to draw conclusions that are meaningful.
Okay. Let's assume that you're successful in getting this information. What would you do with it? How would you process it? Who would you share it with? How would you get confidence levels in the way that you're analysing it?
So it wouldn't be my data. If it gets shared, it's public data. And I would analyse it the way I've analysed the previous ONS data that we had access to. So I've published repeatedly on analysis of these data sets, and I've been able to find all sorts of interesting things. And, as I said, I got a reputation for honesty, so I'm not going to start to try and squeeze the numbers into something that they don't say. I just want to analyse it honestly.
Well, Dr. Craig, that's been really informative. I've learned an awful lot myself about the integrity of scientific analytics and process. So thank you very much for informing me. And I think the listeners out there who have a similar passion for getting to the truth will be energised by what you're doing. It's quite brave to stand up to some of these institutions, especially yourself being such a notable pathologist. So this is going to have far-reaching implications from whatever you adduce out of this data set. So I'm really hopeful that you're going to get the information that you're looking for.
I hope so too, and I'm really grateful that your solicitors firm is standing by us.
Okay. We'll keep everybody updated as soon as the court case progresses, and thank you very much for listening.